ideas that we can kind of deconstruct a little more. It's pretty simple. And
Okay.
then I also wanted to talk a little bit about like physical discipline as it relates to the mind, and then some of the more recent like renaissance of the stoicism in like lifting culture and things like that. Yeah. So
You probably know a little bit more about that than me, but I'll offer the best comments that I can.
Definitely. First things first, though. I mean, how are you doing?
Doing well. I've just been. Uh-oh. Hold on. I'm gonna ruin the recording for a second because the thing that I. Oh no, we're good. Never mind. The recording is still going. Where did my? I don't know where my tamper ended up. That's not good. Well, I was doing a lot better before I realized I didn't have a tamper. Give me a second. I guess we will improvise with a stick, which are in no short supply around here.
Yeah. Yeah. We wouldn't want you to have a tamper tantrum.
Nice. Good one. Yeah, so how am I doing? I'm doing well. I just got back from church.
Nice.
Family's been good. They got a, I'm not going to be there because I have to work. I'm not going to be there the whole time, that is, but my parents got a camper, and they rented a site for, like, the second, like, basically the middle 2 weeks of October. And so they're going to be there in the fall foliage for a couple weeks. And I'll probably visit on weekends and stuff, but I can't, unfortunately, be there the whole time.
Yeah. That's awesome, though.
But that's exciting for them, and the camper's cool.
What kind of camper is it?
It is a Surveyor Legend, as my sister and I always say it. I don't know what the company is. I can't remember. But the line of them is the Surveyor Legend.
What kind of, is it like a fifth wheel, or is it like a big old like trailer camper?
No, it's like a big trailer. Yeah, we used to have a small pop-up that they sold.
Yeah.
And that was really fun, but they got a bigger one. I think their plan is, like, once me and Anna are gone, to just have, like, more mobility and stuff and go where they want.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely.
So that'll be fun. But yeah, so that's been good for them. I've been, mostly just working. I started going full time, so I'm got very good hours this past week, and yeah, it's been good. It's a good job. I work as a mover, for context, for anybody witnessing the conversation who doesn't know. And yeah, good crew of guys, good boss. It's good. Life is good. How about you?
Pretty good. So, yeah, there's some things moving and shaking for sure. The job's all right now, but hopefully there's some things in the works in the future that I'll have good news to talk about. So
Okay.
I just
gotta be all mysterious about it.
What'd you say?
I said you gotta be all mysterious about it. That's fine. All right, then keep your secrets.
Well, if this podcast wasn't public, I would be a little more open about it, but
that's true. We are talking for other people.
Yeah, so for the sake of the floppy years out there, I will refrain from talking about how my life could be better soon.
Okay, sure.
But yeah, no, I've recently, because of opportunities in my personal life that have recently become available, I have taken back up to more disciplined physical training, which kind of, for me, was the reason I wanted to talk about some of the topics that I have lined up for us this episode. Just because I'm, diving back into that world. I started running twice a day which is
Well.
pretty challenging when you're working full time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also been doing some more bodyweight workouts because I don't have access to a gym right now. So, but yeah, man, it's been good. Life's been good. Um, it's been busy, been really, really busy, but it's been good. Yeah, this weekend was good too. We took it kind of slow, so that was good. We learned a little bit more about oh gosh, the shofar, the type of horn, that you blow out of.
Okay.
Me and I watched like a 40-minute video on like what type of horn Jewish people are allowed to use, like what's it allowed to be made out of. That was fun.
That's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you
A
gonna
lot of
get one?
restrictions. Before I watched the video, it didn't even cross my mind. We didn't even mean to watch the video, and now I'm like, those are pretty cool. So you never know.
You never know.
Yeah, yeah.
You should definitely get a drinking horn. Man, it's so much. Drinking beer hits so much harder out of a drinking horn, I found, since I got one last Christmas.
It's harder?
Not harder as in more difficult. Like it hits harder. Like it's more
Okay, got you.
satisfying.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you can't put it down, right? Or can you put yours down?
If you have your like stand, you can put it down. But if you're just like, yeah, if you've just got it out and about, then no.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
You gotta like finish your drink.
you're just locked in.
Yeah. I got a tattoo yesterday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you know the one my sister designed and she got?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the one I got yesterday. It's for anyone who doesn't know, it's a Rwandan tribal shield with two tribal spears behind it. We lived there for a few years in our youth because our parents were missionaries there. But anyways, yeah. So she designed it, and I ended up getting it yesterday. So that was fun.
Do you have any way to get it on camera?
Um,
I think I know where it is. If it's on the same place as your sister, but it might be difficult to.
no, it's by my Africa tattoo.
Okay, yeah, that would be a little harder.
Yeah, just with age restrictions and things like that.
Yeah, right. For context, the place on his sister's body that it is much more publicly acceptable. I don't know anything anybody else doesn't. Wouldn't want anybody to run away with false ideas. It's cool though. I'll see if I can get a picture of it and put it in the video so that people can see.
Definitely, yeah, I'll send you one. Also, today got the Zippo up and running. Boy, is it nice.
I bought a new lighter for today as well. My other one was starting to run out, and it was just like a Bic lighter, so I didn't want to refill it. So I stopped at the gas station and got this very fancy, aka not fancy, about $2 free advertisement lighter for Noria, which is a gas station convenience store up in New England. I don't know if it's around anywhere else.
I've never heard of it.
Well, it's nothing too special. But it is one of the better gas station convenience stores. I mean, it has everything you want, pretty much.
I mean, it's no Buc-ee's.
It is no Buc-ee's. We don't have space for a Buc-ee's around here. You run into a mountain way too fast. I'm pretty sure you need like at least 100-mile flat radius in order to put up a Buc-ee's. Or at least that's
why we have so many.
Right. Okay, so hit me with this quote.
All right. I'm probably gonna botch it, but the quote is, if you never do more than you can do, you will never be more than you are.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I heard that quote was by Master Shifu in Kung Fu Panda. And I don't know where it came from, but I really love that quote.
It probably, I mean, clearly came from Master Shifu. I don't know who else could have originated such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sun
But
Tzu
I
from
like
The Art of War wishes he was Master Shifu, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I really love that quote. I think it, I think that's the main, obviously the focus of any academic endeavor, as well as most physical endeavors, is, you're always, if you're trying to be better, which you should be, then it oftentimes means doing more than you feel like you're capable of, or more than you were capable of, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I mean, applies to pretty much every discipline, right? Like, eventually you got to try something for the first time.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And I thought it tied nicely with, so yeah, I've noticed, and I think you have too. I keep up with some social media, so
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed a sort of renaissance of what people think the Stoic philosophers thought and taught, which is a sort of like grittier, emotionless, like work hard, become like a stone type of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been associated with a sort of manly aesthetic on social media and like bodybuilders and the lifting community, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just noticed it kind of, spiking in popularity again. And yeah, I think it's pretty fascinating. And I think personally, I like it as well, just because it's got more substance to it than just like ego lifting or just trying to look as attractive as you possibly can be. They're kind of meshing the concept of being tough with working out, which
Mm-hmm.
is good. I think we need that again in men.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly more to toughness than obviously like the physical aspect of it, although that's certainly a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that um, is present in a lot of philosophy, not just Stoicism, but also a lot of like early Christian thought, is that like discipline in one area of your life. For example, fasting, I think, is the big example in Christian tradition. Discipline in one area of your life can start to, I guess, develop discipline in all areas of your life. And I think that's true of any virtue. You know, if you practice a virtue sort of on a small scale or in one particular area, it has like an impact on, I guess you would say your soul or something like that. But whatever the part of you that is the you bit, not the thing, not anything you have, but the part that is you. Like, it's almost like each thing that you do has a long-term impact on shaping the way that you think about things and you behave. And that's certainly true with, well, any sort of discipline. Like I'd mentioned fasting, but certainly with weightlifting or any sort of athletic training, running, whatever it happens to be. Like if you can be disciplined about that, it feels like it's easier to be disciplined about other things.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I've seen that in my own life as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've seen how increasing my physical discipline to help me. There's a famous quote. I think Seneca says it, but it's "We treat the body rigorously so that it is not disobedient to the mind."
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I sort of embodied that for a little while, it taught me also how weak my mind was. Because I would reach these different milestones or thresholds, like when I was running or lifting, where, something would happen, like I'd get angry or I would have a lot of caffeine, and then all of a sudden my body did a little bit more. Like I ran a little bit faster, I lifted a little more weight. And I started to realize the limitation was not in my body, but more in my will or my mind. And so if I could overcome that, I could make goals, like I could achieve them quicker, like I could run faster, I could lift more, if
Mhm.
only I had more control of my mind. And that doesn't mean that there weren't physical consequences to that. Like sometimes I'd be more sore, or I'd get a little hurt, or things like that. But I was finally starting to learn that a lot of my own barriers are mental ones, even though I can very easily say that they're not. Like I could be like, well, I'm just not that strong yet. I'm just not that fast yet. But like if a bear was chasing me, I would just be that fast.
You'd be
Like
a lot
mental barriers
faster. Yeah.
gone. I'm not gonna think about if I'm cramping or if my toe hurts or like, oh man, I'm not feeling it today. Like, no. If I remove those things and cut them away and just do a sort of a raw mental zone, I can perform better. And it's so hard to get myself to be there. But that's what my goal has been a lot of times in lifting or in running. It's been like, can I really get to the point where it's just me and my mind, and really know that that's what it is, and that's where I'm pushing myself, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I definitely have seen that too practically for myself. Like in the times that I've been the most locked in, so to speak. Certainly, like my last semester at school, I think was probably the last time I was like peak performance in terms of disciplined of like going to the gym and whatever. But I was also disciplined about just a lot of other things. Like I was much more disciplined about my schoolwork, which has always been. Well, no, that's not true. I was gonna say it's always been difficult for me. It was difficult for me since college because there were a lot of classes that I found to be less useful, but they were still more demanding. Like in high school, there were many classes I found not that useful, but they were not demanding really. So I could just do my work quickly and whatever. It was what it was. But with at school in at university, it was a little bit more challenging to actually do the work, even for classes that I didn't like or didn't find that useful. Um, so yeah, that was something that I got better at being disciplined about. And then eating too, there was a period of time where I was dieting pretty intensely, doing no carbs for, I think I kept that up for like 2 to 3 months,
Yeah.
and fasting once a week. And yeah, it was pretty intense, but like once you start taking off with one discipline, a lot of the other ones start to go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's easier to make yourself do things. Like you're starting to discipline your mind in a new way, not just your body, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people will just assume that, like, you know, bodybuilders or athletes, like they're only disciplined in physical ways. And having been close to that yourself and having, you know, been a part of some of it, you know that that's just not true. Maybe even the athletes don't know it, but they're able to control their will and their mind in unique ways sometimes. And like you said, it bleeds out into everything. Like you can't assume that like a super like in your point when you were dieting and you were working out as hard as you could, were you close to looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger? No,
No, certainly not.
not even when he was not on steroids. You weren't close to that. So, you know, and I think that's something that people don't understand is like the level of discipline that some of those guys have is just insane. And I think that's why a lot of people and a lot of young men admire them, is because they know, like, you know, I'm working as hard as I think I can, and I'm eating as good as I think I can, which is never really the case, I think, but as close as you can sometimes. And you're like, man, those guys must be the next level up in terms of just how disciplined every part of their life has got to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much more than just lifting weights. And I think it, in a lot of ways, teaches you how to be disciplined in other areas, like specifically physical discipline, which I think can only be positive. Like if your physical discipline helps you be more disciplined in your spiritual life or your educational life or personal life, like that's only going to be positive. Even if you're only doing like one run a week or like 10 push-ups every other day or something small, like getting yourself to break through into that next part is going to help you in the rest of your life as well.
Yeah. And it's important also to think about the fact too that it's not necessarily it's not an instant fix. I know many people who are very disciplined about their body, but are not very disciplined in other aspects of life.
Definitely.
I think because they don't know that they should be disciplined in other aspects. So, for example, spiritually, like or even with schoolwork is an even simpler example. Some of the athletes at school were incredibly physically disciplined, but terrible with their schoolwork. And I think it's not because they couldn't have disciplined themselves to that, and probably at a better capacity than I or maybe other average students could have. But they just didn't really want to, like they didn't recognize the good of it. So you do have to have your sort of worldview and philosophy in order for working out or fasting or whatever your physical discipline that you're focusing on happens to be. You do have to have your worldview sort of sorted out before that actually does help you in other areas of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that to like point out too. But yes, for sure.
Yeah, and I think if you're chasing the goal more than you're realizing the level of discipline that you're at or you're striving for, then that's where you kind of get into the athlete who's bad at school. Like chasing the goal more than they're using what's in front of them to discipline themselves more.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to fix the lighting on my video here. Yeah, and so I don't know to what extent like the first Stoics would have talked about this. Like it's interesting. Greece was like one of the cultures that we know was very particularly focused on athleticism in general.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, I doubt that it would have been seen as an athlete's philosophy. I've never heard of it like that. But I wonder if it ever got there, if we have any reason to believe that it did. Because it feels like the application is kind of obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're definitely not the smartest people, so.
That's true. My stick tamper is not working extremely well, but that's okay. I've had to relight a couple times here.
Yeah, I think another interesting crossover that I look at a lot is like, as someone who I would say that I do lift and I watch the lifting videos and I watch the inspirational videos and the social media accounts and stuff. There is so much admiration for like the knights, the samurais, like sort of the disciplined warrior. And it's if you look back in history, those guys were all very well educated. They were probably disciplined in all sorts of different like cultural traditions, as well as actual education and spiritual stuff and religious stuff, as well as being probably some of the best athletes at the time, considering they were warriors. And that is definitely something that requires athletic aptitude.
Yeah, the image of the sort of Templar knight or like religious holy crusader kind of thing, definitely it's endured for a long time, and it seems like those two things, like spirituality, religiosity, I guess, and physical prowess definitely seem to go together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's
mean,
true to some extent with the samurai too.
What'd you say?
I think that's true to some extent with the samurai too, although their kind of organized religion was definitely different than ours. I don't know nearly as much about kind of Japanese spirituality, but it certainly seems like it's part of it, even in that very different culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've read a little bit about it, and a lot, it's similar in a way that it crosses over with the discipline area a lot. Like keeping a clean house, looking after. Oftentimes, the samurais were noblemen, so they were looking after people working their fields, people working on their land. They were kind of looking after more people, so they had some status. They had something to uphold, as well as being an apt warrior. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You look at some of the like Spartan training regiments too, historically. Some of that stuff's pretty crazy. I was learning recently about a group. Their name is escaping me right now. It starts with a K, or Kappa, I guess, in Greek. But it's anyway, it was like the Spartan secret police, pretty much is how they describe it. And we don't know very much about them, but we do have pretty like in terms of how they functioned, but we do have pretty detailed understanding of how their training was. And with Sparta, of course, you have the discipline training from a very early age, but I think this started even with this group of warriors in particular at even earlier, as if almost like a Jedi sort of situation where they're taken from their families early on and then trained just as warriors. You actually get a little bit of that, sort of a glimpse of that in the Republic, when Plato or Socrates, is it Socrates talking or just Plato talking in the Republic? I think it's just Plato.
Yeah.
It's been a second. It might be Socrates, but I think that's the one where people say that it seems more like Plato just saying stuff than necessarily something Socrates actually taught. But regardless, there's a piece where he's talking about the Guardians, a long piece where he's talking about the Guardians, and I think he gets to the point where he's saying, whoever the Guardians are, they need to be pretty much focused on fulfilling that role from the very beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we often forget how young it was, because, like you were saying, they get removed and they start that discipline training regimen from a young age. It was like 7.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is, like, in terms of becoming an elite warrior, it was effective.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very effective. And so, if nothing else, I think it's a testament to the capabilities of, I don't know if I'll say all humans, but at least men, and specifically young men, more specifically young boys. I mean, if we look at what 7-year-olds are doing now, there's a lot of iPad kids, there's a lot of, it's just, maybe some rec sports without trophies, things like that, where it's just sort of like, it's a shame because of the potential.
Yeah.
And when you acknowledge that the potential exists, it almost makes you want to be, like, angry with society, like that we're not using it. Maybe that, and that doesn't mean they have to become these elite warriors and then they die at like 30 because that's all they do. That's not that. But there is potential, specifically in a young man's life, from that early of an age, to start developing different habits of training, a regimented, like discipline to whatever sort of education they're getting. And that is sorely lacking. And I think, if it could be aimed in the right direction, it could be very productive for all of us.
Separately to this podcast, we've spoken somewhat extensively about the idea that the threshold for adulthood just keeps like getting further down the line. People, the drinking age is 21. That's when you're supposedly able to do pretty much everything that an adult can do in the United States. But now people are saying, oh, your brain's not actually fully developed until 25. And you're like, okay, well, actually in history, the threshold of adulthood was like 15, 16 for a very long time across most cultures. And they built what we have today. And so you're sort of left wondering why we are wasting so much youth on preparing for a vaguely defined and perhaps non-existent goal rather than just doing things.
I think even worse than that, there's so much misused, like, wasted idle time. And that's not to say that, kids shouldn't be able to play. I don't think that's what I'm aiming at here. I'm just saying that with the time that 8 hours a day, that's a 40-hour week that we have kids sitting at a desk in a classroom.
Well, it's also important to define what play means too, because you said you're not saying that they shouldn't play, and in fact, I think you're saying the opposite of that. In school, they don't get that much opportunity, but even when they're home, most kids nowadays, as you pointed out, are not really playing. They're consuming, absorbing, inputting, however you want to put it, but spending so much time with I'd say screens, I guess. I don't want to necessarily make screens the villain, but maybe social media or just media in general, just consuming media content
Yeah.
constantly. Eventually, you got to
Yeah.
output something. You can't just keep inputting and expect it to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
I've had
And so,
many people, even recently, say things like, "Oh, you're so young, you have so much time," or whatever, or "You're so far ahead for your age," or whatnot. And it kind of frustrates me hearing that a little bit. I'm not trying to complain. I appreciate the compliment, but I do feel behind anyway on the grand scheme of existence and how
yeah.
far people were by my age for, thousands of years before this.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also feels weird too because like it's almost like they're providing you with an excuse. Because like oftentimes when I'm complaining about like, man, I feel behind or whatever, it's because I know that along the way I wasted some time or I made a mistake that cost me a position that I probably could be in, or maybe I'm doing it now. Like maybe I'm not using the time I have every day to be in a better position. And so then I complain about it and I'm like, man, there's a lot of people, especially throughout history, who were like, I don't know, ruling kingdoms or had a household by the time they were my age. And people were like, oh, you got so much time and it's different times now. It's just like, that's not the issue. The issue is that I know it's possible and I'm not doing it. And I could be, but
Mm,
I'm not. And so I don't like this so much time because that's just BS anyway, honestly. Like, one of the things that I firmly believe, because it's true, is we're not promised tomorrow or the next breath.
mm,
Like, you got a lot of time is dumb. You don't. You don't know that. People die young all the time for reasons that are out of their control. You could get struck by lightning, you could get hit by a fallen tree, a car could swerve, and we're in cars every day. Like, there's we're not promised the next day.
mm.
And so I hate that you have so much time lying. I don't think that's not a good way to live, even if it's
Yeah.
well meaning.
The only way you can assent to that is with a maybe. I might have a lot of time, or I might have a year, or I might have, 30 seconds. Yeah, you just don't, you really don't know. You can't know.
Well, and I think maybe if I had the time to think it out, I would say a more appropriate answer might even be, well, I don't know that I have a lot of time, but I should be doing better with the time that I have.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And now it's sort of up to us. I would say there is some room to be, I don't know if I want to say angry at society, because that, you're not just supposed to be petulantly angry, but have sort of a view to the future of maybe something different. Um, when I was a kid, I was very eager to please and would kind of do whatever I could do to fulfill the expectations of the adults around me, particularly my parents and such. And I think a lot of kids are that way, um, assuming they have, good relationships with their parents and such. And I think if I had been expected, and by the way, I don't mean to blame my parents necessarily for this, that's just kind of how it is now. But if there had been more expected of me, I think I would have been able to deliver more. And if I had delivered more, I'd be, however much farther now than I am in reality. And so I wonder what practical steps can be taken on the individual level of the family, because obviously you can't just wait for society to change. You have to actually do it, and then maybe society will follow you. But what sort of practical steps can be taken with one's own kids in the future to sort of start pulling this trend in the other direction?
Yeah. Well, and the other question that I think follows from that is, how good of a relationship do you want to have with your parents? And what type of relationship do you want that to be? Because I don't know that you would sacrifice the relationship you have with your parents, which only exists because of the way you were raised. Now, does that mean that you may have sacrificed something else along the way, like some idea of success in some category? Maybe. Is that worth the trade? That's a hard question. You could still have a good relationship with your parents and it just not be what it is now, if maybe they push too harder in some areas.
Mm-hmm.
But you can very easily cross the line, and I think you've seen it a lot. I've seen it a lot. Parents who push their kids too hard, and then all of a sudden something happens with that kid. And again, I don't think it's the pushing the kid hard that's the problem, but if you do it wrong and you push a kid aimlessly at something that doesn't matter very, very hard, and you don't give them any reason behind that, then they will drift away from you and away from that thing.
One of the things to
we're running into.
Yeah, no, I don't want. That's obviously not what I want, or not what I would want from my parents. I think though. I think probably the key, and this is just me talking, somebody without kids, so this is just speculation, of course. But one of the things that I think I observe among parents that push their kids really hard in certain directions is that, and it ruins their relationship, or at least negatively affects it, is that they are pushing them towards something that the child isn't super interested in, or maybe doesn't value to the extent that the parent does. So I mean, maybe it's stereotypically something like a sport or music or something, but whatever it is, I think one of the things that you can do to be able to push children hard without super negatively impacting your relationship is to find what they want, or as close as you can get, because obviously, at some ages it's harder to figure that out than others. But figure out kind of what they want, what they value, and then try to set them up with the skills and the discipline that they need to achieve that, whatever that is.
Yeah, but I would say maybe that you could do even better, because what the child wants isn't always what's best for the world. Never mind just the family or the child or the state or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's some higher calling, which is why you can definitely tie in sort of, religious and traditional, and maybe even just like country, like patriotic goals, is like if you can get the child to subscribe to something higher, then they'll understand the more mundane, which is, I think, something that you see a lot of times in like military brats. For better, like in some of the better scenarios I've seen, like where they have a good relationship with their families, they appreciate the hard work that goes into the freedom that they have because they're seeing it firsthand. And then they themselves often go off to serve because they believe that that is the higher calling.
Yeah, I do think, though, that even behind, so obviously I didn't mean to say that anything the child happens to want at any moment is what's good. Certainly,
Yeah.
There are things that they may want or think they want that they actually don't. I would say, given the cognitive faculties that they will grow into, they would know that they don't want those things. But I think there is still something to recognize, that the desires, from the moment to moment desires of a child, are reflective of sort of a more righteous or higher desire or calling beneath that. And so the challenge of the parent would be to recognize whatever that is and push them towards that, rather than something that you as a parent want for them in terms of a specific goal. Even I would suggest the military. There are many, the military is a fantastic thing to go into, but there are also many other disciplines that one can pursue which are just as good and, could serve the world in a different but perhaps equally valuable or just differently valuable way. And so I would want to be cautious about finding a specific like career path or life no, I think there's a fundamental purpose of life for all humans, but life mission, I guess I would say, to push my kids towards, and I would rather try to identify what it seems like at the most fundamental and also highest level they want to do, and try to equip them for that, whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is definitely easier said than done, even just recognizing what that is, and probably only possible at certain ages of development and such. There's a lot of nuance that I probably am ill-equipped to bring to this conversation, but
Yeah. At the very least, I will say one thing that I believe that is important is learning discipline. And I think one of the best ways you can start to learn that is through physical discipline. Because I think that's something that if you can create the habit of, even if it doesn't come till later, you will learn why that sort of discipline is
Yeah.
good. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And certainly also one of the other things, I mean, that training the body is incredibly important, but we've also talked about training the mind and how much of that is lacking. And so I think starting off developmentally with physical discipline as a basic springboard for other things, and then mental discipline as well. We've spoken about in the past, both of us were students of philosophy in college, and one of the elements of that is pretty foundational is critical reasoning, what argumentation is, how logic works from a fundamental perspective. And that's the
yeah.
kind of thing that I think we should be, in addition to physical discipline, teaching kids pretty early on. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah,
it was
definitely.
kind of difficult for me to learn now, but honestly, at the end of the day, if A, then B, A, so B is not that hard to grasp. And I think if I was
No.
taught it from an early age, almost like speaking a language, you just sort of pick it up, um, and understand, and you'd be able to go so much further, like as far ahead as we are, from among some of our peers regarding those things. Imagine if everybody had that training from, say, fourth or fifth grade onward, and then, who knows what you could do with something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. We would live in an entirely different world. And I want to kind of expand the things you're saying, and or really just give a little more detail, just in case anybody doesn't quite understand what we're talking about. Because this is a dialogue that we have had many times. And I think if we're just going to break down, like if you don't know or understand what like a course surrounding critical reasoning or logic is, it's really learning how to organize arguments and thoughts and organize them systematically. So, like, why you should do a given thing, or if this, then that. So, that sort of argument is like, if it's raining outside, the grass grows, that sort of thing. But learning how to organize it properly changed our lives, which is the reason that we talk about it so much, I think. And even though we were good at writing, maybe good at math, like there was some threshold we hadn't crossed till we learned how to organize our thought in a way that made us, in a good way, more dangerous. We learned how to be more concise. We learned how to speak more clearly, to communicate ideas more effectively by using language better and by using honestly just human vocabulary better, which not only helps us communicate but also helps us be alive. I think.
Yeah,
And I think
good way to
one
put it.
thing that really bothered me and you was, the reason I say separately is because I think we both woke up to it on our own at some point. It was shocking that we didn't have those skills.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
by the time we made it to our second or third year of college, we were realizing we really didn't know how to organize our own thoughts or say the things we meant to say or understand what other people were saying as clearly as we could.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the biggest one, I would say. Probably certainly it helped me organize my own thoughts in my head and be more articulate about them. But I think probably the biggest thing that it did is I realized for most of my life, I wasn't really understanding what anybody was saying, which
yeah.
is maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but people just communicate very unclearly a lot of the time. And
Yeah.
that's for a lack of training for the most part. And certainly I was among those people, as Cohen just mentioned, as was he before we took this class. And so sometimes you basically all you can do when you don't have the training to actually break down and recognize what somebody's saying is to sort of caricaturize their perspective and throw them into a category that you already sort of understand and assume that that's what they're talking about. And that's pretty much the cause of most disagreements that I see in normal life. But now I have the ability to not only understand what somebody's saying to me with their words better, but also to even divine what they mean to say if they're not even saying that. And that
Yes.
is one of the most useful skills I've ever been taught.
Yeah, and in my head when I think about this, I call that charity, which is something that we talked about a lot, being charitable to the other side that's arguing. And I think that is something, like you're saying, that has changed my life in so many positive ways. Is when oftentimes, like you're saying, when you're arguing with someone, even if it's a good argument, like you're just trying to be on the same page as someone, you don't realize that you're saying the same things, or maybe that you're even concerned about the same things because you're just not organized with how you're communicating or even thinking. But after learning how to organize my thoughts and sort of reform my vocabulary, um, I realized that sometimes people were arguing to me and they didn't really know what was even bothering them or what they were saying or what was at the root of what they were trying to say. But through learning how to think and organize my thoughts, I realized that oftentimes what they're saying may be something I need to hear and I can discern it from that, or I can help them realize what I'm saying by discerning what they're worried about. Which comes through like a sort of systemization of what people are saying, tearing away the fat, getting to the muscle of what someone's idea is if they don't even know how to get to it. Which is a shame that people don't know how to get to that. And if we're going to be like conspiracy theorists, you might almost say it's intentional. Like, why are we not teaching kids how to organize their thoughts? Because it's so rudimentary. Like the class we took, I think deductive and inductive logic, and which one of them was called critical thinking. Those classes were easier than algebra. They were easier than basic math. They were literally like A plus B equals C, but turning your words into that so that you can understand how to have a clear cut answer of what you're saying or what someone else is saying. Which, again, it's so rudimentary. It could be taught alongside third or fourth grade math. And by the time it's in middle school or high school, I mean, like the mistakes that people make in middle school and high school, I just imagine if you really grasped how to think, you could remove so many of them.
Yeah, it's.
Like,
I think it's
you knew how
fundamental
to
to
organize
learning,
thought.
which is why it should start at like, yeah, late elementary, early middle school. I don't know. Maybe you could even push it before that. You just have to kind of test out how it works, but certainly, it's the foundation of all learning. It's just thinking, like just learning how to think about anything. You can, in logic, if you aren't familiar, you when you formulate an argument and write it down, you use variables like A, B, and C, very much like algebra, to represent ideas. And that goes to show, I think, the versatility of the discipline in that literally anything can go in place of those variables. So anything scientific, anything mathematic, anything historical, anything philosophical, anything can go in place of those. So it's just the fundamental how to use the tools that you have to learn, and then you can sort of from there begin learning other things. And that would have been incredibly valuable to me.
Oh yeah,
And so to bring
definitely.
in to bring it back sort of to the discipline discussion, even knowing these things, you still have to be disciplined about doing it, because it's still very easy for me to hear what somebody says, caricaturize it, and assume that it's in a category that I already know. But you have to have the sort of self-restraint, I suppose, humility to some extent, and the discipline to take the time to think about what somebody's saying. And so that discipline not only helps you think and understand things better, but it also leads to better relationships. And I think just in the way that we had been speaking about bodybuilding, it leads to discipline in other areas as well, and potentially even just being a kinder and more understanding person. I know I've certainly gotten that way. That's something that I've struggled with in the past, like empathy on the nuanced scale in terms of knowing exactly how somebody's feeling and why and when. It's not something that's come naturally to me for my entire life, but being able to actually understand where somebody's coming from has increased my ability to do that, exponentially. And so I think this goes to show, kind of to support a point that we had been making earlier about how discipline in one area really does sort of play itself out across all the areas of discipline in your life, any virtue.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
And I guess at the moment, in terms of practically what to do with that, you have to just do it yourself in terms of teaching your children, because in the United States anyway, I don't know how other countries are, but the public school system certainly isn't going to do it for you. You might find a private school that's willing to teach things like that, but that costs money, and you're not guaranteed that by any extent. So you have to sort of put the discipline into learning it yourself and then be able to pass it on, which is another level of learning.
And that's why I was kind of jokingly like, it almost feels like a conspiracy theory, but why is the American public school system not teaching people how to think?
Mm-hmm.
Or just even how to organize what they're thinking, you know?
Yeah, I think the answer is probably pretty economic in nature, and I don't know that I would blame it on capitalism in particular. I think this would probably be the case in a communist or socialist system as well. But at the end of the day, what you need from an economic standpoint are factory workers, because that's what's going to produce the most things the quickest. We spoke actually a little bit about Marx's criticisms of Smith and Das Kapital, and I think these criticisms could honestly be turned around on Marx's own economic system. But just to use his examples, like capitalism focuses on making the skills that you have smaller and smaller and smaller until your skill goes from making a sword to hammering the metal out of the ground, and that's all you do, or smashing nails, and that's all you do, or even narrower than that. Eventually it gets to the point where you're just pressing the button that makes the nails, and now you have almost no skills. But if you're trying to produce people who are economically useful for the country, you really don't need to make them be able to think, because that's not important for pressing the button to produce the nail.
Yeah.
And I think there's some evidence that that's part of the reason. And I don't, we sort of flippantly called it a conspiracy theory. I suppose it is that, but I also want to emphasize that conspiracies don't necessarily have to be a bunch of mustache twirling suits in a room deciding how things are going to go. I think sometimes individuals just recognize how they can benefit, and more than one individual recognizes that, and so that ends up playing itself out across a whole society or country. So it's not as though I'm necessarily suggesting, and maybe Cohen's suggesting this, but I don't think he doesn't have to be suggesting that that there's a group of people that are stopping this from happening intentionally, but just that as a result of wickedness and greed, it comes about that making people think and making people into good people just isn't prioritized.
Yeah, and so I'm going to try to say this as efficiently as I can, but it seems like you're saying, for the benefit of the country, and in benefit we just mean like monetary benefit.
Yeah, materialistic benefit, I should have said.
Yeah, so that sort of thing is attractive to a lot of people, and the easiest way to make as much money as you can is to produce as much as you can that's valuable, that's sellable. And like you're saying, to do that, you don't need people who can do anything other than press a button or just be simple. So you don't have to value the person very much in order to make a lot of money, which is why China makes so much money.
Yeah.
But that's what you're trading. And another point you made is it doesn't have to be a group of men. In fact, I don't know in America that it could be a group of men. It's that the society values wealth so much in all of America that even if we're saying we're mad at it, we are participating in pursuing wealth over, a simpler, more humble life with less, and that's sort of always been a part of America's heart, I think, is like, get as much as you can, at least recently it feels that way. It's like, make as much money as you can, buy as big of a house as you can, and then when you start making more money, buy a bigger house. And what's strange about that is, like, more expensive houses and cars come with money, but we've also seen a decline in family sizes. So it's like, what are you even filling the space with if it's not just a hoard? Here's a deep reference. It almost feels like everyone in America has dragon sickness.
Yeah,
Like,
it does.
yeah, we're. It seems like the pursuit of money is so grand
Hmm.
that you don't even want to have kids. But that's just a reflection of us not valuing ourselves or people as much. So it's a conspiracy in a sense that, I guess I don't know what that means, but it doesn't mean, like you're saying, that it's five guys in a room who are planning it all. It's something we're participating in, we're allowing to happen.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up the Smaug reference. For anybody that didn't catch it, it's a reference to The Hobbit. And because I remember when I went to those movies were coming out when I was growing up, and I was going to see them in theaters with my family. And even before that, though, we were reading the book together. My dad read it to me, and he was talking about, reading the section that was describing the vast hoard of treasure that's kind of down under Erebor that Smaug is laying in and basking in. And I remember asking my dad, what does a dragon do with gold? What use does he go out shopping, or is he buying, does he want a bigger mountain or something? And my dad, sort of laughed and just said, well, he's just greedy, and that's all it is. He doesn't actually need it for anything. And I think that's really true, and that's exactly what you're describing.
Yeah.
The image of a lone single person, or even a couple sitting in a multi-million-dollar mansion that's full of nothing living, is very similar in my head to the image of the dragon laying under the massive mounds of gold in the empty mountain. It's all kind of the same story.
Okay, but you know what's so interesting too, and I agree. It's a lot of the same story. But what's interesting is it always feels at least like the dragon knows it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because it's always the sleeping dragon, right? It's like the dragon knows, like he's not doing anything with it. He's sleeping on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like he knows the man is coming to get it.
Mm-hmm.
The dragon's weakness is in the heart of man. Man's going after the treasure he doesn't need, risking his life for the treasure he doesn't need, losing his soul for the treasure he doesn't need, and the dragon knows it's coming. Like he's just waiting for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most right because he knows he's sitting on the wealth, doesn't need it, neither does the man, and he's going to devour the man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's
what is
exactly what happens in The Hobbit.
Yep.
And I think
Yep.
it's a good point to be made too, because the dragon knows it, and the dragon is also participating in it. But he knows it's destruction, right? Like he knows that he hates Thorin Oakenshield in the book, and he knows that it's going to destroy him, and he also knows that Smaug himself has already completely given over to that destruction. But he's been in it for so long, he's so much more powerful than Thorin is or will be once he's consumed by the greed, that he will be able to destroy him even more. And so it's like, I think that's definitely a stand-in on Tolkien's part for demons or Satan or something like that, in terms of an evil that is both aware that it's evil and also wants other people to experience the destruction that he's experienced, but he's just so much more powerful than them that it's almost like I don't know, it's sort of that mentality of I'm playing a losing game, but I just want everybody else to lose with me.
Yeah. So what do we do? I guess that's the next question, is like if we know that the fault of the way society is mostly people's. It would be, I think it's sort of foolish to think that there's 1 or 10 people on top of the world deciding everything. Like that's just maybe
the reality is much
of,
more horrifying than that.
What'd you say?
I think the reality is much more horrifying than that. Like the idea that it's you and me doing that, oppressing humanity, is much more horrifying.
Well, yeah. And have you read Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky?
I've not. I need to read more Russian literature than I have.
Yes. So I think one of the main themes in the book that you really feel is, okay, so for anyone who doesn't know, I'll just do a quick overview. I won't spoil anything. It takes place in a very, very oppressed Russia.
Which is
And
Russia most times.
yeah, but specifically really, really bad at this point. Like people can't really buy shoes or food. Like it's rough.
Mm-hmm.
But what he's really saying in the book, when you just really extract the idea out of it, is it's each other. We're oppressing each other. You know, it is the fault of each other, not one guy at the top. Which is just the case. I mean, you know, when we look at America, we really, really embody the government is the people, and then you know we hate the government, and it's just like what do we, you know? And people are like, well, the government should be the people. It's not anymore, and you're just kind of like, well, I don't know that that's true. Maybe we aren't clinging to the values quite as tightly as we should be. Because it's not like we couldn't make a change. If okay, let's say, like you said, it's more terrifying if it's us. Because like if there's 10 guys at the top, well, let's get all however many millions and billions of us there are and just kill them. That would be fairly easy.
Yeah.
You could probably do it with 100 guys. But like, what would be scarier is if it's in each one of us that is the oppression, that is the socialism, that is the communism, that is the hate, and that is the ambition that is just so like, dragon sickness. It's just chasing the gold. Like, if that is just us, and we're so mad at it, like, well, there's where the war has to be waged.
Yeah.
With, and I think that's something that one of our favorites. I call him a philosopher. One of our favorite philosophers talks about, Jordan Peterson, is like the idea of make your bed in the morning. It's almost been like memeified, but really the idea is every little thing you do matters, and the type of person you are matters. And if you look at this, like, okay, well, let's say worst case scenario, which is just also the truth, it is all of us that are the cause of the things that we hate. Then it matters even more that each one of us is doing good.
Yeah, that's take up your cross is what that means.
Yep.
That's the idea. You've spoken. You brought to my attention more than anybody else that line in Scripture, and that through line, really, not just that specific Scripture, but the theme of across, I would say, the entire narrative is that in order to bring what is good out of what is evil, you have to kill what is evil first. And that's the self. The irony of Christ saying that is that he took up his cross and there was nothing evil about him. And so how much easier should it be for us to put to death what actually is evil? And yet we can't, even get rid of our, bad habits of the day to day. And Jordan Peterson speaks about that on a very practical level, which is something that I appreciate, making your bed. A lot of times, sometimes making your bed is the first death that somebody has to go through because they're not even willing to clean things up. And that's not something that they're even disciplined enough to do. So starting as small as making your bed might be what's necessary to start the process of killing the thing that you want to see dead. I mean, even... Sorry, 1 second. Loud road noises probably behind me. You mentioned the idea that, like, oh, well, if there's 10 guys at the top, let's just kill them. And killing them is certainly the answer. But if it's not the case that there's 10 guys and it's actually millions of guys all oppressing each other, then killing them is still the answer. But it's sort of the manner in which you do it that changes. And you have to sort of rely on the individual taking that responsibility up and killing yourself through discipline, through sacrificing your desires to higher desires. We even mentioned that in our discussion about children, but adults too, sort of recognizing that, and this is the importance of religion, and I think Christianity specifically, is recognizing that however well you live your life, somebody's already done it better in the person of Christ, and there is a higher goal that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit have, that nothing that you're going to want is going to even approach that. So you have to sacrifice pretty much all of your desires to that in order to kill the ego, the self,
Yeah.
however you want to talk about it, and humble yourself so that you can be glorified, because you can only be glorified once that evil's dead.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you brought up that scripture that says, "Pick up your cross and follow me," and that is Jesus talking, which is the God of gods,
Mm-hmm.
Which is also just the full embodiment of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a visceral thing, because a cross made out of wooden beams is heavy, and if you're carrying it uphill barefoot on rocks, it's torturous. And then imagine that the whole world is trying to stone you on your way up. But that's the calling. And I think even a lot of Christians don't realize that. They think that for some reason that it's going to be easier, or that they could just be like, Jesus does it all for me. But that's not the calling at all. The calling is that even when you have to really get down and dirty with like killing evil and like becoming better, because to be any good at all, to be remotely pursuing the path of good, you have to be killing evil.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the carrying of the cross that Jesus himself tells us to do, which is the embodiment of truth, which is really just saying, to be a part of truth, to even go in the direction of truth, you have to own up to the burdens of the cross. You got to walk with it, and I don't think that's something that is a comfortable idea.
Mm.
And I don't think it's supposed to be comfortable. But I think that's part of what makes it better. It's like when you're weightlifting, it's like the tearing of the muscle that you're undergoing in each lift, that's not necessarily enjoyable. But knowing that it's making you better and stronger and more apt is why you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And Jordan Peterson also said something. He talks about how learning and growth, so like becoming better, there's always pain. The pain of letting go of not knowing or having not been what you are now. And so the more growth that's there, the more pain is there usually. It's a bigger thing you're letting go of or you're killing. So oftentimes, the more pain, the more opportunity for growth out of it. Not necessarily growth, but opportunity for it. And so if you're facing the maximally painful thing and you're going to go into it headstrong, you have the most potential for the biggest growth. And that's what we're called to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the other things I want to point out about the analogy to Christ's suffering on the cross and with the cross as he carries it is that he was fully capable at any point of putting it down, striking everybody dead, calling an army of angels and such. And that's not just a thing to point out how powerful God is. It's a thing to point out how powerful you are and how you have the capacity in your own life to not take up your cross and to not suffer. And what more, I don't think there's any more visceral image of that than America, as this sort of opulent Western power, which we can take away pretty much any struggle that exists in life with technology, with systems and organizations and such. And now you have to manufacture your own struggle. That's what weightlifting is, right? You have, in the days before going to the gym was living because you had to work to survive. Now you don't anymore. And so in the same way that Christ had the power to give up the suffering of the cross at any time, you also have the power to give up any suffering that you might go through and just kind of live a life of pleasure and comfort for the most part. Obviously, you're going to have to endure some suffering that's kind of you can't prevent, but for the most part, in the Western world, it's very possible to avoid any sort of suffering. But Christ submits himself to the cross instead of defeating it, I suppose, and in doing so defeats evil rather than I guess the lesson there is endure suffering to defeat evil. Avoiding suffering is not defeating evil. Enduring it is what defeats evil.
And I mean, to make it a little more, I think, Because then you might ask, like, okay, well, if I don't have to really suffer now because everything's so easy and it can be comfortable, why wouldn't I just do that? And you're saying, well, you need to defeat evil, and people are going to be like, well, but like you said, it's really comfortable. So what evil is there? And that's the dragon, that's asleep on top of the gold. You're aiming for the gold, and you're just like, well, what evil is there? Yeah, there's a dragon there, but there's so much gold, And that's the blindness. Like, it's festering, it's lingering in the dark there. If you're not addressing it immediately, it is there. It is there. Just because it's comfortable now doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah. And they really bring that out in the Hobbit films, but in the book, it's present in the books too. Is once Thorin is taken by the gold, the fact that there's a dragon there is completely irrelevant to him. Like, Bilbo's kind of advocating for the people of Lake Town. Like, there is a dragon coming for them. It is going to kill them. Men, women, and children are going to be burnt and devoured. And Thorin's like, yeah, but we've got Erebor now, and Erebor has a lot of gold, and so, what does the dragon really matter? If the dragon comes for us, we can fend it off because of all the stuff we have. So, and that's really the mark of his complete descent into the evil of greed. Well, we've been going for a little over an hour here. To sort of bring that all back to discipline. Discipline is, the point of it is to kill evil. Discipline is the weapon that you use to defeat evil, and that's why you need it. Excuse me.
And physical discipline is a great place to start.
Yes, it is. Physical discipline of dieting, fasting, weightlifting, running, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Or make your bed, if you can't do that. Start there. But I think it's probably pretty realistic to, I don't know, maybe not eat quite so much at dinner every day, or maybe not necessarily, cut out a stop at McDonald's, or...
Yeah, I was about to say, just don't go out of your way.
Yeah.
To do things that are gonna hurt you. Like, don't go out of your way to, like, have a dozen donuts. Like, if that's where you have to start there. That's a great place to start.
And once you realize you can do that, because discipline, as we established earlier, is going to play itself out across your whole life. Once you start it in one area, you'll realize you can go to the gym and you can run and you can be the best you can be. So. Yep. All right. Well, very good.
Yeah. Good job. Yeah. That was great.